This brings us to our third roundtable, which is on market regulation and consumer behaviour. Can you imagine a world without laws, without regulations? No doubt, as we've said already today, it would be extremely chaotic. We do need that regulation. To avoid the chaos within the market, we need market regulation to be implemented. And to exert that oversight, we need to prevent certain undesired, or you might say unfair actions. For our third roundtable, I'm joined on stage by Serge Abiteboul, board member of the French Electronic Communications Regularity Authority. Welcome to you. Hello there. We also have with us Nathalie Stubler. She is the Special Advisor on decarbonization for Air France KLM Group. We have Thibaud Vergé. He's Vice President of the French Competition Authority. Isabelle, hello to you. Isabelle Spiegel, Global Head of Environment at Vinci. Hello to you. And last but not least, we have Pierre-Jean Benghozi, Research Director at the Ecole Polytechnique IP Paris. All right, I shall change seats. I want to sit at this. Why don't you sit there? You're welcome to sit there. Oh, it doesn't matter, honestly. It's no problem. Thank you, Serge. Very kind. It's true. I do need my water. How are you feeling? How's the conference going for you so far? Enjoying? Yeah? All right, if we start with you, Serge, the theme today, of course, is looking at looking at regulation. You work on a regulatory board. Talk to us about why market regulation is so important. Why is it beneficial to consumers? Why do we need it?
Why is market regulation important and beneficial to consumers? I mean, why is our work useful? That's what your question. The telecommunication markets, that's what we regulate, is a service market in which end users are mainly consumers and companies. It's important to regulate the sector to ensure an effective and loyal competition between operators to benefit end users with high-quality service and innovation at attractive prices. I tried to put all the words there. In more trivial terms, the role of regulation is to prevent the market to turn into a jungle. So we want to protect consumers, we want to protect smaller companies. Now, the second part of your question is how do we associate the consumer with regulation? We do it in a very standard manner. First of all, we interact with consumer associations because they know the issues. We have regular exchanges with them, we have meetings, we do public consultations, as we are forced to do actually by law, and things like that. We also have developed tools for informing consumers. So for instance, the French people may know My Connection Internet, which is a way to essentially know where you are, whether you can have internet connection and what quality. The same thing for mobile telephone with Mon Réseau Mobile. So the idea is very simple. If you inform the consumer, then the consumer will make better choice and drive the market in the right direction. Something we started in 2017 is something called J'alerte l'Arcep, I alert Arcep, which is an online reporting platform that allows consumers, businesses, and authorities to inform us. They inform us of malfunctions, they inform us of the problems in their relationship with operators. That's for communication operators, postal operators, and also press distribution. So we want the consumers to behave as actually concerned citizens by giving us information about what's going on. So for the operators, it's an incentive to do a better job so that the consumers do not complain. And for us, it's very important because it gives us a lot of information, small signals, low quality signals, but also major trends, evolution. So we actually know what's going on. And that's very important because if we want to regulate the market, the bottom line is that we have to understand the market.
Well, absolutely. You spoke about kind of trends and evolution there, which I think are key words, Serge. Ultimately, consumer behavior changes. It doesn't stay the same, and that's why, people like you are essential. Eric Lebet spoke to us earlier about, young people being at the heart of IP Paris and really helping to drive the agenda forward. I want to think about recent changes in consumer behavior, specifically where sustainability is concerned. Have young people, do you think, influenced or force the industry to kind of change what it has on offer?
It's an important question, and unfortunately, I'm not so optimistic. I mean, like when you see really young people, they really have more opinion, they're more concerned with sustainability than the rest of the population, but also the entire population is actually getting more concerned about the topic. But now when it gets to choosing and deciding, it's a bit different. For the digital world, there is a tension. There is a tension between you want more connectivity, you want all these great gadgets that come up to you and that you really like, and at the same time you are concerned with sustainability. You've heard that, yes, the digital technology is having some very serious negative impact on the environment. It does have some also positive impact, but it has a negative impact as well. So people are really concerned, but I'm not sure right now they are informed enough to know what the right thing to do. And I think that's what we see also as an important issue, is to inform them, educate perhaps them. Now, from the point of view of, in your question, there was also how do industry react to that? Yeah,
it's a change in offer.
So the clear thing is they react strongly with more and more greenwashing. That's certain. Now, if you talk to people in industry, they want to do things. You find really a strong desire by many people in companies to change things because they're concerned, maybe because their kids are telling them that what they're doing is just not proper for the world. So they want to change things. But at the same time, the companies have to make profit, and that's their role. And that's so you have tension also inside the companies between those who want to go for more sustainability and those who look at the book and say, well, if we do this, we're going to lose market share because our competitors don't do that. So I think probably industry is at the core of the solution, but I think regulation should guide them by putting rules that they have to follow. I think expecting them to just by miracle turn into green companies, I have doubts.
Okay, so no miracles, no magic wands. Serge, we're going to speak a little bit more about market regulation and where you see it going. For the time being, though, I want to bring Nathalie in because I know that there's a time constraint. Nathalie, we spoke a little bit about evolution and change in consumer behavior with Serge. The aviation sector is your sector. It's going through a real transition. It's really evolving. Changes are ongoing. The actual thing, the task, I should say, of decarbonizing the industry, I think it's colossal. Your thoughts on that?
Yes, it's a huge task. I cannot hide it. But it's not because it's huge that we should not do it. There is no choice. The entire industry has committed to net zero by 2050, as it's a bit far. Some of us have already committed to closer commitments. For my group, Air France KLM, we have committed a milestone in 2030, which is quite close. So we have committed to a KPI, it's minus 30% of CO2 per passenger kilometer. It's a usual KPI used also for our industry. In 2030, when we compare to 2019. If we look at the past, when we were between 2005 and 2019, this famous reference, because after there was a COVID crisis, we have decreased by 20% this carbon intensity. So less number of years to reach it by 2030, and even a bigger decrease to achieve. So it's quite a commitment, I would say.
Oh, Nathalie, I'd love to stay more. I know you're having a very important event today. I hope you don't mind me sharing your son is graduating, so you must get off. Let's let you go. A very big congratulations to your family today. Thank you very much.
But I can just elaborate
if you have time.
On a bit on the few levels. And yes, it's true, my son is having his graduation at the same time, so it was not so easy for me to split,
To be here.
but I will run. Just to give a bit of example, because yes, the word greenwashing has been also pronounced, and what is important for a company is to show what is done. So we're not going to hide what are the levers used to decarbonize. Mm-hmm. There are mainly three for us. The first one is the fleet renewal. For sure, aircraft manufacturer, engine manufacturer, they are making progress in the use of fuel. And that is key. For example, if you replace 737 NGs by a 320 Airbus Neo, you gain minus 15% of fuel consumption, and so for CO2 emission. And a long-haul aircraft, you can gain up to 25%. So this is important. This is quite huge amount of money. We were talking also this morning from Veolia, what is in the investment of the company. It's required kind of 2 billion per year to do this change, but it's the first lever. The second lever, I would say, it's operations. Operations, what is it? To make our flight operations the most efficient, the ground operation the most efficient. There, the figures is around 5%. It looks maybe small, but it engages all our staff, all our pilots, all our flight dispatcher, all our ground ops, ground operation staff. So this is quite key. We have engaged also a nice collaboration with a French startup for my group, where they help us to use all the flight data to monitor our best practice in eco-piloting, or even to change the way the aircraft is climbing. So there we made some progress. It's 5%, but we take it. We take every point, as we know that it will be super difficult. And the last part, and it is recognized, is sustainable aviation fuel, because there is not so much levers to use in our industry. So this is quite key, and this is new. This is developing. This where the regulation is entering to make the link with what you were saying before, with this use of sustainable aviation fuel. France was ahead with an obligation of incorporation of 1% already in 2022. And the European regulation, we think it will be voted. It's not yet voted, but there have been a consensus in the last trilogue. They will push us to use 6% by 2025, by 2030. Sorry, 2% 2025, 6 by 2030, and then we will climb. We will climb a lot, up to 20 by 2035. So, which is a huge increase in 5 years. And of course, the regulation is giving a framework, and us to reach our target I was mentioning before, we will go beyond this regulation. Our intention is to use worldwide 10% of sustainable aviation fuel.
Is there any downside to the sustainable aviation fuel?
Yes, it's first, it does not exist in this quantity. So this production has to be realized. So of course the regulation is giving signal that the production has to be realized. So that's important for us. And then of course we will have the entrance of the production. So either biomass, if we are talking about biofuel, or either electricity, if we are talking about e-fuel. E-fuel is made from hydrogen and CO2. So, of course, these are part of the equation. We need that. We need this production to cope with the regulation, and for those who want to go further, that will be important. And as any product which doesn't have any production today, this is super expensive so far. So, of course, this also raises questions toward the consumer, our passenger. Today, we are already engaging them. We have put in our fares a small surcharge to take into account what we are doing today, because already today, we are using this sustainable aviation fuel. And for sure, the key question is then the reasonable price, even we know it will be higher than the kerosene, to make sure that the consumer is willing to pay. Today we are engaging our corporate customer, cargo, our passenger, to help us to reach that and join our SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel Program. And we are also proposing it to our B2C customer to take part of it. But yes, it's a start. So here you see the link between the regulation and also what the companies can do. But for us, it's the start of a long journey, I would say, in this sustainable aviation fuel. The start is quite promising, what we did in 2022 already, by putting 42,000 tons of SAF. It looks a bit small, but it was already 17% of the worldwide production. So, yeah, it was for us an encouraging start for this this reach and this goal we need to reach by 2030.
Okay, Nathalie, thank you very much for sharing your insight with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I'm escaping to my son's graduation. Sorry about that.
Okay. Just checking with us at time here. Pierre-Jean, the note that Nathalie left us with this idea of regulation, I want to get a sense from you kind of how effective you feel European regulation is when it comes to kind of convincing industries that they need to be offering sustainable goods and services. How far do they go in getting industries to do that?
I should say that maybe completing the point made by Serge, that in the final analysis, the object of the regulation is always the customer or the citizen. And when we speak of efficiency, the question is how we measure this efficiency. Is it the efficiency towards the citizen in general, or for each consumer corresponding to the various activity? And from this extent, the point and the difficulty for European but also national regulation is that, in fact, especially in sustainable development, but in all the activities, the externalities are very important. The externalities, which means the complementary effect or the complementary impacts. And one of the challenges is precisely to be able to measure and to incorporate such externalities in the evaluation. And from this point of view, the regulation toolbox has an essential need to be able to draw on and to mobilize the production of information and data and metrics and ratings and KPIs, as we already discussed earlier, and in order to make such externalities visible. And from this extent, first, the role of the science and the research is very important. And in this perspective, the example of IPCC is really emblematic and paradigmatic in the sense that it contributes to produce information. And therefore, the European regulation has also to go deeper into this capacity to produce data. And in Arcep, they are speaking of regulation by data, in order the providing data to the consumer and to the citizen helps them to make its choice more easy and more adapted to integrating this the externality I mentioned. And the other point I should underline in the way to make European regulation more efficient is the capacity to develop cooperation among the various regulators at the national level, and not only speaking of international organization or European organization. So the title of the conference today is Together for Action. I don't remember exactly the undertitle, but it's exactly that. And the example of the approach of sustainable development in telecommunication is also interesting from this viewpoint. And Arcep in telecommunication has been able to develop an analysis of the impact and environmental impact of the telecommunication. And this has been, in the second time, adopted at the European level by the other regulator in order to develop a collective and continental approach. So I think this is a point.
Sorry, I'll cut you. I'll just
No,
let you finish.
and the third point I would like to also to underline, in order to go deeper and with European regulation, is not only to create some specific measures, incentive or constraint, etc. But it's also has been said this morning, is to create a systematic change, because in fact the action in order to support regulation of the sustainable development is not only to create constraint to a specific company or to a specific industry, but also to change all the structure of the ecosystem, of the supply chain, of all the actors contributing to producing goods and services. And this huge change give, of course, to ex-ante regulation a very important role. And I'm not sure that from this extent, the Europe, but also more globally, all the institutions at the international level have been able to take such systematic change into consideration.
I want to get a sense from you about the consumer. You know, we have the adage that, you know, the customer's always right, or the consumer is always right. In this day and age, do you feel that the consumer still has a certain amount of power? Or are they kind of more subject to changes and regulation that's taking place in the market and not necessarily an active participant in that? What's your thought on that?
No, they could have the power, because they have the power to decide and they have the power to pay for a specific service. But the consumer have, and it also has been said on different way today, there is some kind of inconsistency of the way, if they are thinking as a citizen or if they are thinking as a consumer. As a citizen, they are willing to reduce the effect of industry on the climate, on the heating, on the biodiversity, and so on. But as a consumer, they will try to find a lower price, complete coverage, they would want to travel, and so on. And this is a main difficulty for the regulation, but also for the political orientation, to be able to reconcile these two perspectives. How, on the one hand, to provide an overall transformation, an overall view of the desirable change, but how also to implement such huge change into small decisions that help the consumer to take and to the decision. And this is why I say, when I was speaking of a regulation by data, providing ratings, providing metrics, providing KPIs, providing all the data, helping the consumer to change his mind, not only incenting him to decide on the price or the desirability of a service, but also to decide on alternative criteria.
Okay, thank you very much. Thibaud, I want to stay on that same kind of idea. You know, Pierre-Jean spoke to us about helping the consumer, these incremental steps, helping them to kind of change their mind or make decisions. What are the principal ways that we can use or that are being used to make consumers aware of the sustainable products that are at their fingertips, essentially? How do we let them know what's out there?
Yeah, I think that's a key question, because consumers often find it difficult to identify the right product. So could mention, so there's a recent survey that has been done on UK consumers on sustainable products, and half of them explained that one of the reasons why they did not adopt a more sustainable lifestyle was that they felt they didn't have the right information on the kind of products that were available. So right. Information is really key. So it's difficult for me to tell exactly how information should be transmitted, but one thing I can mention is the work competition authorities have been doing in the past when firms have been trying to hide the information from the consumers. And I can mention two examples we had. So one is still an ongoing investigation, but it's been in the public domain for a while now. So if you have teenage kids, you've probably all heard of BPA-free plastic bottles for babies. So that has been banned. So BPA has been banned in food containers for babies for a while, but A bit later, a decision was taken to ban it in all food containers after 2015. And so what firms, so BPA is also used, so it's used in plastic, but it's also used to produce epoxy resins that can be found in the linings in your tins for canned food.
Wow, okay.
And so firms have been colluding on trying to hide information from the consumer on the quality of the product they were selling, so as to be able to wait a bit more before bringing to the market these new products.
So would you say it's consumer or market regulation that brought to light the fact that these things were being hidden? How did it come to the forefront?
Well, decision will be made in a few months, so I can't tell exactly what's in the case. First, because I don't know the case, but the idea is exactly that. So we try to intervene and stop firms from hiding information from consumers. So we had a similar case a few years ago on linoleum floors, where again firms had committed together not to communicate on the environmental quality of their products, so as not to compete on that dimension of the product. So lack of information is clearly an issue for consumers, and we have to find a way to go around that. I think one of the other issue is the lack of trust for consumers. So we've been talking about greenwashing for a while, but so again in that survey, something like half of the consumers decided that they feel they can't really trust the information they get on sustainability claims, or that sustainability claims is not by firms is not going to change exactly their view on products. So lack of trust is a clear issue. The question is how we can help consumers, how we can help firms to build trust. And there's a trade-off between letting firms make the claims they want on their product and be able to compete on that dimension of their product, also to allow them to bring a new product faster, or maybe they don't all want to do the same type of innovation. But at the same time, creating common ways to label products or to advertise products is also a way to build trust for consumers. If they know there are labels they can trust, but that can only work if market regulators, so especially consumer protection agencies in that case, have the power to go and check what is really done in these labels.
I mean, staying, Thibaud, with this idea of trust and kind of gaining, in credibility vis-a-vis the consumer, does data help when it comes to consumers and how it influences their choices? Does it play a big role in your view?
Well, I think data can help, and what Pierre-Jean mentioned on providing ratings to consumers is something that can help if they can trust the ratings. So it's been used in many industries for a long time, but again, we've seen firms play with the ratings. There's been a lot of economic work done both within some of these digital platforms that have been using these ratings and in many markets to see how to better design the ratings. So we know that if anybody can rate products and you can't check whether they've even tested the product, it becomes difficult to trust for consumers to have any trust in the data that they observe. But at the same time, there are lots of difficulties in some of these on some of those platforms where you want consumers to have used the product, but you don't. Consumers are rated, so in many of these many industries, both the consumer and the firm are rated. So you don't want a collusion to take place between the two sides, or you want to make sure that one of the sides cannot threaten the other to punish back by giving a bad rating for any reason. So,
I mean, I guess that dissimulating information and hiding what a product is from consumers is dangerous. I guess one of the ways of combating that would be speeding up the commercialization, speeding up the production of kind of high-quality, sustainable goods. How do we do that? We've spoken today about accelerating, but it's easier said than done, Thibaud.
Yeah, exactly. So it's I think Pierre-Jean mentioned that. So many consumers claim they might be willing to pay more for sustainable products. So I think again, so there's a study in the Harvard Business Review that mentioned a survey where 2/3 of the consumers claim they are willing to pay more for sustainable products. But when you see what they actually do and when they have to pay for a product, only 1 out of 4 is actually buying more sustainable or more expensive products. So that's a first difficulty. And at the same time, firms are not willing to launch sustainable products if they are more expensive and they don't meet the demand. So we have to find ways to, so we can see that a bit as a chicken and egg problem at the same time. So you want the demand to be there, but the demand will not be there if there's not enough, if there are not enough products, and consumers are not going to buy if they don't see if they still have other available options that are cheaper. So there are many things that can be done, but the trouble is, and the discussion was in previous panels, is it also has to be acceptable. So one way could be, so we mentioned carbon pricing and redistribution this morning, but if consumers or citizens don't trust government to redistribute, they will never accept the carbon taxes. You can incentivize consumers. So we've seen that in many markets. So you can get subsidies to renovate your house. But then you also need the supply to be there. So what we know is that if the supply is insufficient, and you have a big boost in demand because consumers get incentives to get subsidies to renovate, the only thing you will see is prices will rise. Existing firms will pocket the subsidies, and consumers will not pay less. So, and consumers will not pay less, which means that in the end, the actual demand will not have increased. So the market will still remain small. So
this is what I was going to say. With inflation as high as it is, purchasing power has obviously got to play into this as well. You know, people simply don't have the money that they may have had to give to certain products as they may have had in times gone by before inflation.
Yeah, no, exactly. So you need to find a way to have these products come up quickly very often at sufficient scale so that you can produce them efficiently and maybe prices won't be that much more expensive relative to the others. So some of strong regulations that will ban some of the existing product is one way to switch, but you also have to be careful that at the same time it's not going to lead to very expensive, more expensive products coming up to the market and consumers being really unhappy about that.
Well, Thibaud, thank you very much for responding to those questions. What's clear, Isabelle, is that innovative solutions are necessary if we're going to move forward. With the climate emergency of increasing urgency, how do we ensure that those innovative solutions on sustainability stay at the top of the agenda where they should be? How can we ensure that happens, Isabelle?
Yeah, that's a huge question. And indeed, I think it's been a lot of years that we are talking about climate change and accelerating. And when I listen to scientists, it's been really a long time. They are all saying that. And at the same time, when I attend to conference like this one and a lot of others, there's still we need to, we have to, and think about, and there's still a hope to find the best solution. And my first message is that, yeah, we still need to innovate, clearly, but there are also a lot of solutions and things that are actually already there that could be applied. And the way we do it within our company, with Vinci, is really to split a bit this, because environment is already really complex. We talk about climate today, but we know that we have resources, biodiversity, water, etc. And if we want to bring all this information together to make decisions, it's already really complex. So at Vinci, we said, okay, well, let's focus on the existing solution. And that's already complex to implement because it still needs behavior changes at least. And this is through our reduction targets by 2030, for instance. So we said, okay, let's have targets. But with those targets, we are listing some action plans that are actually something that we could implement. I'm not saying it's easy and it's not more costly and etc. But that's a clear plan where we know more or less where to act, and that's one part. And here it's a summary of key actions like low carbon concrete on materials, like decarbonizing the fleet of vehicles moving on our motorways, for instance. And in addition, we have a structure called Leonard, where we keep putting money and time and etc. Dedicated to innovation and foresight. And I'm just telling you to have a clear message to all our leaders. First, at Vinci, we said we want to focus on reduction of emissions. That's the first thing, and we'll see later about new technology to keep reducing, so after 2030, so like hydrogen, and that means that we start investing into hydrogen, but that's not something which is absolutely necessary, a necessity to already achieve our first milestone of reduction. And then carbon capture and storage, for instance, that's also something that we treat more in our innovation system. So we had to split a bit the structure and to work clearly closely with a world partnership. So what environment is bringing also is the urgency, the emergency to act that you were reminded in your question. And for that, it means that it doesn't make full sense if Vinci is working alone. So we need definitely the visibility from regulation, but also to partner with other industrial, with all our ecosystem, to make sure that we do not waste time into developing this new innovation or just implementing what is actually already available.
I mean, we've spoken a lot today about kind of how do we communicate those goals, whether they're sustainable goals, and how do we, let consumers know what's available, because sometimes, as we've realized, they're just not aware of what's available to them. How does your company look at communicating its sustainable goals?
Well, we are talking a lot about the need of transparency and communication, etc. And again, I come back to the fact that environment is not so easy. So we want to address that with a lot of transparency, clearly, but also explaining what we do. So definitely, yes, we set up goals. That's the way to put all ourselves into action. And that's something that we did 4 years ago. So we are 4 years after, 2023, when I can already show some actions that we took, so again, low carbon concrete. We're starting with one specific concrete that we pulled without any cement, so 90% reduction CO2 emission in our own building, in our own headquarters. And then 3 years after, I am with 26 at least specific projects where we add similar approaches. So it's not exactly the same level of decarbonization, but it is really the way we are scaling up, at least going one by one, making by the action, by experimentation, the proof that it's working also for tunnels, for social housing, for hospitals, etc., etc. So really making this demonstration. But what we need is really, if we want to scale up and that it's becoming the new standard, well, we need clients, our customers, to really not be afraid of asking us to implement that. So that's why we need to communicate first about the goals, but also the performance and the results of what we are doing. And also never hesitate, and regulation can help, but at the same time, too much and too precise regulation is taking so much time that it is also a burden where we'd like to focus on the performance. And clearly what's happening currently with all the regulation coming from the Green Deal and all the standards that everybody is trying to put together is that sometimes I am a bit afraid that we are losing the strategic part. So with Vinci, we know why we're doing that. I mean, we decided really to be proactive in the acceleration and the taking into account of the environment. It's a strategic priority from the group. And that means that we know where we can really influence. So that's why on materials, that's why on the traffic on motorways, on the traffic on airplanes, for instance, we can have a certain level of influence, not all for sure, on bringing new technology for sufficiency, for instance, in terms of energy efficiency. That's also areas so where we know where we can act. And here, yes, it's up to us to make the demonstration of where we stand and share, because also the return on experience is really key to first help others to copy-paste, because yes, in environment, we do not have time to be too much in a competitive mode. The solutions, there's not one unique solution, so we need to share and really put them all together. And yes, that's where and why we need to communicate definitely on where we stand.
We've heard the word, the big T, several times today, transparency. Thibaud spoke a lot about kind of credibility and gaining that trust. Again, it's so complex. Why should consumers not be skeptical today with, as we've been saying, you know, so much greenwashing and so much dissimulation of real information? There's certainly a natural skepticism.
Yeah, there is. And as a company, we're not the one who are the most trusted by our customers, by citizens, etc., etc. So it's up to us also to bring together the right ecosystem of advisors, scientists, academics, etc., etc., to help us here. I can just tell you on the environment impact assessment, for instance, Vinci is financing a share, lab research on environment, Vinci Polytech, for 15 years. So it's been 15 years. We are working on getting credibility in the way we are making decisions, developing solutions, etc., on environment. So that's just one thing. But the way we more specifically put this into practice again internally was that 3 years ago we launched environmental awards. So that was to say to our people, we have targets by 2030, but what we need is that everybody can take action from now. So the first year we take action. The 55 finalists, in fact, were fully assessed through a multi-criteria approach. So mixing environment, but not only climate, biodiversity, water, resources, and an economic approach. And that was a way to show and to make sure that, okay, even if one thing is good for at least one category, let's say reduction of emission, we do not have another category like resource management. For instance, we're hearing a lot of questions around the electrification. Do we have enough lithium, for instance, and other minerals or materials and metals to cover the big electrification field? So that's a way that we did it. But then coming to marketing, I told you about low carbon concrete. So we have to make things also simple. I mean, the full life cycle assessment approach has been done. It's known, it has been reviewed by academics on one side, by experts from consulting on another side. But the way to communicate to our customers has to be also a bit simplified. So it is indeed low carbon because the message is clear enough like that. So that's a way.
Okay, Isabelle, thank you very much. I was just looking at the time there. I do want to give a full 10 minutes of questions from our audience that we'd like you to respond to. So can we be joined on stage, please, by Ulysses Collet and Matthias Gilbert. They are from the Ecole de Polytechnique, and also Matthias is a first-year student in engineer program at INSTA Paris. Welcome to you both on stage, gentlemen. Just a quick reminder to our panelists, this is a kind of an open floor session, so feel free to chip in if you'd like to respond to some of our audience questions. What's the first question, gentlemen?
All right, I'll be asking the first question. So first, I'd like to briefly thank all our guests for all these enriching and diverse points of views. And I'll quickly jump into the first question. It will be about advertisements. So today, the customer is being bombarded with an overwhelming amount of advertisement, which is in direct contradiction to all what whistleblowers claim to be as degrowth of consumption, the advertisements being signals to consume. So how is it possible to guide the customer through these two different incentives, how to help him make a choice, whereas there is a battle being fought between the two messages which he is confronted to?
So guiding the consumer. Would you like to come in on that one, Serge?
Yeah, I view that as a bit as a role of the regulator, because we are somewhat neutral. We are at the service of the consumer, so we can develop a relationship with consumer where there is trust. And so for me, it's really a major part of our role is to gather information, to gather data, to gather expertise, so that the consumer can come to us and find information about us. And for that, we cannot do it alone, of course. So, for instance, we work a lot with ADEME, the Agency for Environment. We work with academics. We try to get the more neutral opinion on the topic. And for instance, as I said, we've gathered a lot of information about the environmental impact of the digital world, digital technology. First on the telecom, and then thanks to a new law, we also can now get data for all across telecom technology, digital technology. That's also the thing to see is we need the law to give us the means to acquire this information and this knowledge. And I also encourage you to read a report that we wrote with Arcep, which is an evaluation of the impact, impact of the digital technology in a precise year, which was 2019, and forecast provisions for 2030 and 2050, which is dreadful if we don't do anything, right?
I confess I started that report, so very interesting indeed. Anybody else like to answer on that question of kind of guiding essentially the consumer? Yes.
Yes, maybe just a small point. I think the difficulty for the customer should be, and we discuss, firstly, to be able to understand and to have trust in the information, the rating, and the ranking which is provided. And of course, in this extent, the regulators are very important. So guiding them is also providing trustworthy information on the one hand. On the second hand, it's also to help them to understand the complexity of the situation. Speaking of sustainable development, is it speaking of biodiversity, speaking of heating, speaking of pollution, speaking of carbon emission? All these points, of course, are interrelated, but they are not necessarily in the same direction. If we are substituting the plastic with, for example, the glass, is it clear that cleaning the glass calls for water? So is it so good for water reduction of consumption?
Good question.
Or not? So this is a kind of explanation of the situation which is important to guide and to orient the customers. And we had an example this morning regarding the situation in Poland, where they are very dependent from the fuel and gas consumption. And speaking them of pollution instead of heating and climate change is much more important to change the consumer habits rather than just speaking of climate change in general. So it's just two illustrations for me.
Okay, interesting. Yes, Isabelle, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick point as well, because regulator has a clear role here, but at the same time we are a provider of infrastructure. So what we think as well is that it has to be easy, first, or feasible, even easy and even fun. So that's part of a new story that we need to bring together to consumer. So we should not think about only reducing the bad things that we are doing, but really bringing something much more positive, you know. So like taking an electric car on a motorway, it has to become first feasible, easy, and then fun. So that's the sort of thing that we'd like to put clearly on the table.
Yes, Thibaud, you want to add a final word on that?
Yeah, no, I think totally agree. So there are two things. So one, we don't want to stop firms from being able to advertise the quality of their products, and that's very important that they can freely advertise the different aspects. So it might be difficult for consumers to really understand that, okay, they are better on one side, but there might be negative points, as Pierre-Jean mentioned, for some of the products. And so the only role there for regulators that I can see is really to prevent any clear greenwashing claims. And there, firms have to be punished and named and whatever. But otherwise, you don't want to have them constrained to be too close on to all have to advertise on the same dimension. So you really want to let them choose the way they advertise their products. And so you mentioned this, so electric cars, and they are fun, and that also relates to bringing the new products to the market, question that you had before, and I think that's where firms also have to find the right way to convince consumers. So one of the, so you mentioned electric cars, but part of the success of Tesla is not because they advertised on being electric cars and no emission, is more being on the innovation they were bringing, that they were still fun cars to drive, and when they buy a car, that's what people are looking at, so more than on the emissions very often. So if you start from banning firms or banning car manufacturers from advertising on the performance of the car, that might also maybe make it more difficult sometimes to convince consumers to switch. So we have to be careful there on exactly how we want to intervene in markets.
I think it's a key question. We spoke earlier about kind of guiding the narrative to make sure that it engages the consumer. Gentlemen, as you can see, our panel are absolutely fired up, raring to go for the next question.
Okay, so we were wondering about technological fix, which is one of the most promoted ways to answer the climate crisis and adapt to current carbon footprint regulation. But it's one scientist warned the most about because it's passive. It doesn't change the consumer's behavior nor its engagement. Although these are considered as the cornerstones of the ecological transition. To what extent should regulation involve or focus more on the consumer's behavior and engagement, maybe to awake him to be a real ecological citizen rather than a consumer?
That question over to our panel.
Okay, so one thing that can work in some cases, and so behavioral scientists have been looking at that, is so peer effects or social norms can play a role. So consumers are not all the same. Some are will adopt new products or more sustainable products much faster than others, and if what your neighbors do becomes important to you, then that might be one way to switch larger populations. So one example that I can mention, so in Canada, in one city, so the municipality was trying to push people to stop collecting grass clippings after mowing their garden. Because then they had to collect them, they had to bring them to landfill sites and so on. So they tried to convince people to do that, and only very few local so people were switching. So behavioral decision scientists from the local business school intervened with the municipality, and they started going door to door to see people and to just give them flyers saying, okay, your neighbors are doing it, you can also do it. And so that put pressure a bit on consumers. And some people, so within 2 weeks, intake had already doubled. So very often it's just, you have to convince a small share of consumers to do it, to make the switch, and that and usually the ones that are more likely to switch, so that's not necessarily extremely expensive. And then building on that, you can, through peer effects or social norms, so maybe for your concrete, that's also, you get examples and the other firms will be tempted to do the same switch. They realize that that's the way we should do it, and then people will switch. But that takes time, and it's very often you have to be careful how you design it, but that's something that can be done.
And if I may just add indeed that the worst thing that could happen is to say that it's not my problem. I shall await to regulator or companies to do that, or my neighbor to do that, or etc. So it's put back all this energy, because I think everybody agrees that we need to live within the limit of the planet and decently and etc. So bring all this energy into action, even if it's small action to begin with.
Okay, Serge, I know you wanted to say something, and perhaps we'll...
Yeah, because we, you know, with all the studies we did about the environmental impact of the digital world, we realized that some basic things that the consumers could do were actually of humongous importance. And I think it's a question of informing them, explaining it, and it takes time, it requires energy, and maybe we're probably not doing it enough. And the government, everybody should do it, also the telecom companies. The first one is the time span of a telephone. You know, in France, it's about 2 years. This is ridiculous. The telephone can be used much longer. Now, if you know that 80% of the energy that is used, so just looking at the energy, but there are all the other dimensions, but just the energy, 80% of the energy that you use for a telephone is for fabrication. Only 20% is used by the normal usage. So when you hear that you should send less emails, okay, send less emails, but it's marginal. The real thing is keep your telephone longer. Use your Wi-Fi and not mobile communication. So there are very simple citizen action that can be taught that would help us reduce dramatically our carbon footprint. But also all the other stuff as well, material and everything.
So keeping the telephones longer is a good start. I know you want to come in here.
No, yes, maybe on a provocative way, I should say that the problem you address is not so much a regulatory problem, but a political problem. It's a political issue because regulation is adapted to regulation of industry, of companies, but the question of regulating and incenting consumer on a systematic basis, for me, is much more political problems, also because, but it has also been said, not all the user and the consumer are the same. If you are thinking of the situation in rural area or in urban cities, it's a completely different way. If you think, for example, of the transportation of the Uber Eats, Uber, and Amazon delivery and so on, the question is completely different if you have access to all the service within 15 minutes in the city, if you are 20, 50 kilometers from a shop in a rural area. And the difficulty to provide a global perspective for all the consumer is also this one, and this is a political issue. It's not a regulatory issue from my perspective.
Okay, well, Ulysses and Matthias, thank you very much for bringing those questions to life for us on the stage today. Good to have you up here with us. We hope that you found our third and final roundtable interesting. Yes, we can certainly give the gentleman a clap, absolutely. We hope that you found that the third and final roundtable informative. We've looked at kind of key market trends, consumer trends, and the principal concerns, you may say, for us as consumers, and also some of the challenges that regulatory boards are facing. I want to say a final thank you to Thibaud, to Isabelle, to Pierre-Jean, and also to Serge for really bringing our third and final roundtable to life today. Thanks so much. It's been really informative.